I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would plan revenge. Before all this, I would have described myself as reasonable, forgiving even. Funny how quickly your self-image can change when your life falls apart in an instant. It's been 3 months since I discovered my wife's affair. 3 months of living a double life, playing the role of devoted husband while meticulously planning her downfall. Our 10th anniversary party is tomorrow night. 75 of our closest friends and family will be there to witness what I've orchestrated. They don't know it yet, but they're not coming to celebrate our marriage. They're coming to witness its execution. My hands shake slightly as I smooth out the divorce papers on my desk one final time. The lawyer assured me everything is in order. All that's left is deciding exactly when during the party to serve them. Timing is everything. I want maximum impact. I want her to feel a fraction of the humiliation and betrayal that has consumed me these past months. I take a deep breath and remind myself she deserves this. After a decade together, she made her choice, and now I've made mine. The weight of the gold anniversary band on my finger feels suddenly unbearable, like it's burning into my skin. Tomorrow it comes off for good. The day I discovered Christina was cheating began like any other. It was a Tuesday in March, unseasonably warm, the kind of spring day that makes you believe good things are just around the corner. The irony isn't lost on me. I had come home early from work, a surprise half-day off that I'd planned to use catching up on yard work. Instead, it became the day my marriage died. I remember every excruciating detail with a clarity that haunts me. The house was quiet when I walked in, but something felt immediately off. There was a tension in the air, a stillness that didn't feel like emptiness, but rather like held breath. "Christina?" I called out, dropping my keys on the console table by the door. No answer. I was heading toward the kitchen when I heard it. A muffled laugh from upstairs. Her laugh, the one I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. But there was something different about it, a note I'd never heard before. Then a deeper sound, a man's voice too low to make out the words. People often describe moments like these as if time slows down. That's not how it felt to me. Instead, everything accelerated. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. My mouth went dry. I took the stairs 2 at a time, moving on instinct rather than conscious thought. The bedroom door was partially open, just enough for me to see them before they saw me. Christina, my wife of nearly 10 years, was in our bed with another man. His back was to me, but I recognized him immediately. David Winters, my coworker. Someone I'd had over for dinner countless times. Someone who had shaken my hand, looked me in the eye, all while secretly sleeping with my wife. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to me. Not to us. Not after everything we'd built together. Christina saw me first. Her eyes met mine over David's shoulder, and for a single suspended moment, the world existed only in that gaze. I saw shock, then fear, then, most devastatingly, relief. As if she'd been waiting for this moment. As if some part of her had wanted to be caught. "James," she whispered, and David turned, scrambling to cover himself. What happened next is a blur. Shouting. Christina crying. David stammering excuses as he gathered his clothes. Me standing in the doorway, strangely calm on the outside while everything inside me shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces. "How long?" I remember asking, my voice eerily steady. "James, please," Christina began, clutching the sheet to her chest. "How long?" Each word felt like glass in my throat. 7 months, she finally whispered, unable to hold my gaze. 7 months. Over half a year of lies. Of coming home to kiss me with the same lips that had been on him. Of sharing stories about her day, carefully editing out the parts that would incriminate her. 7 months of making a fool of me. David tried to speak. "James, man, I cut him off with a single look. "Get out of my house before I do something we'll both regret." He left quickly, not even fully dressed, fumbling apologies that meant nothing. I didn't watch him go. I couldn't take my eyes off Christina, this stranger wearing my wife's face. When we were alone, the silence filled the room like poison gas. I sat down on the edge of the bed, as far from her as possible, feeling the mattress dip beneath my weight. Our mattress, where we'd slept together for years, where we'd made love and had lazy Sunday morning conversations and fought and reconciled, now tainted forever. Why? The question escaped me before I could stop it. A mistake. I didn't actually want to hear her reasons. Nothing she could say would make this okay. Christina started crying, those soft, hiccuping sobs that used to break my heart. Now they just made me nauseous. "I don't know, James. We grew apart. You were always working. David was there. It just happened. It just happened, I repeated flatly. For 7 months. It just kept happening. She reached for my hand. I jerked away as if her touch would burn me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Are you sorry you did it or sorry you got caught? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I stood up, legs unsteady. I need to get out of here. Where are you going? There was panic in her voice now. I don't know. Away from you. James, please, we need to talk about this. I laughed then, a hollow sound that didn't belong to me. Now you want to talk? After 7 months of lying to my face? What could you possibly have to say that I would want to hear? I grabbed a backpack from the closet, our closet, and stuffed it with whatever clothes my shaking hands could grab. I couldn't breathe. The walls of our bedroom, decorated with wedding photos and vacation mementos, seemed to be closing in on me. Don't go, she pleaded, still clutching the sheet, still naked beneath it. At least let me explain. I stopped at the door and looked back at her. My wife. The woman I'd planned to grow old with. The woman who had just destroyed everything. And there's nothing to explain, I said quietly. You made your choice. You chose him. I walked out, down the stairs and into my car with no clear destination in mind. I just drove, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, tears finally coming once I was alone. I pulled over when I couldn't see the road anymore, parked on some anonymous suburban street and broke apart completely. Hours later, I checked into a hotel room that smelled of industrial cleaner and other people's lives. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone. 17 missed calls from Christina. 23 text messages ranging from apologies to pleas to accusations that I was being unreasonable by not letting her explain. As if there was any explanation that could undo what she'd done. I turned off my phone and lay down on the stiff hotel mattress, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. How had I not seen this coming? There must have been signs. Late nights at work, weekends with friends, her password on her phone changing, the way she'd stopped asking about my day, the gradual disappearance of intimacy, both physical and emotional. But I'd been so busy with the promotion at work, so focused on building the life we'd always talked about, the life I thought we both wanted. A good career, financial stability, maybe finally starting the family we'd been putting off, all while she was building a different life, a secret life that didn't include me. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there replaying every moment of the past 7 months, torturing myself with what I should have noticed, what I should have done differently. By morning, exhaustion had dulled the sharp edges of my pain, leaving behind a hollow ache that felt like it might never go away. The next few days were a nightmare of logistics and raw, exposed nerves. I stayed at the hotel for 3 nights before realizing I couldn't afford to keep paying for it indefinitely. This was my life now, suddenly having to factor in the cost of temporary housing because my own home had become uninhabitable overnight. Christina called constantly. I finally answered on the 4th day, if only to stop the relentless buzzing of my phone. James, please come home. We need to talk about this in person. Her voice sent a physical pain through my chest. How could something so familiar suddenly feel so foreign? There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly. Of course there is. 10 years of marriage and you're just going to walk away without even discussing it? The audacity of her accusation lit a match to the kindling of my grief. I'm walking away? That's rich, Christina. You walked away the moment you decided to sleep with another man. In our bed. It was a mistake. A 7-month mistake? That's not a mistake, that's a choice. A series of choices made every single day. She started crying again. Once the sound would have made me do anything to comfort her. Now it just made me tired. I love you, she said through her tears. I never stopped loving you. That's not what love looks like, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I need to go. Where are you staying? At least tell me that. No. Oh, why not? Because I don't trust you anymore, I said simply. I'll be by tomorrow to get some more of my things. Make sure you're not there. I hung up before she could respond and sat in my rental car, parked outside a coffee shop I'd never visited before. Anonymous. Safe. My new reality. The next day I went to our house during my lunch break, knowing Christina would be at work. I took only what I needed. More clothes, my laptop, toiletries, basic survival items. I couldn't bring myself to look at our wedding photos or the vacation souvenirs we'd collected. Those belonged to different people now, to a life that no longer existed. I found a furnished month-to-month apartment by the end of the week. A sterile, impersonal space with beige walls and generic artwork. But it was clean and quiet, and most importantly, it contained no memories of Christina. Work became both torture and salvation. Torture because David was there, avoiding my eyes in the hallway, his face pale whenever I walked into a meeting. The office grapevine worked quickly. Within days, everyone seemed to know what had happened. I could feel the pity in their glances, hear the whispers that stopped when I entered a room. But work was also the only place where I had a purpose, a role that hadn't been destroyed by Christina's betrayal. I threw myself into projects, volunteered for extra assignments, stayed late every night. Anything to avoid going back to that empty apartment where there was nothing to distract me from the wasteland of my personal life. 2 weeks after Discovery Day, as I'd grimly come to think of it, my boss called me into his office. "James, have a seat." Mark gestured to the chair across from his desk, his expression carefully neutral. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "No, you're not," he said gently. "No one would be under the circumstances. I've been worried about you." Something about his kindness cracked the careful shell I'd built around myself. My eyes burned and I had to look away. "It's been difficult," I admitted. Mark nodded. "I can imagine. Look, I know this is delicate territory for a workplace conversation, but I want you to know that if you need time off or more flexible hours while you sort things out, that's entirely doable. I appreciate that, but work is actually helping. Gives me something to focus on. I understand that, but you're working 14-hour days. That's not sustainable, even under the best circumstances." He was right, of course. I was exhausting myself deliberately, collapsing into dreamless sleep each night only to wake up and do it all again. Running from my thoughts, from the images that haunted me, Christina and David together, in our bed, in our home. "What about David?" I asked suddenly. "How is this affecting his work schedule?" Mark's expression tightened. "David has been transferred to the Denver office, effective immediately." I blinked in surprise. That was fast. The company has a clear policy about workplace relationships and their potential impact on the professional environment. His transfer was necessary and non-negotiable. The corporate speak didn't quite disguise what had happened. David had been shipped off to preserve workplace harmony, to make things easier for everyone, especially me. "Thank you," I said quietly. Mark nodded. "You're a valuable member of this team, James. We want to support you through this." As I left his office, I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and resentment. David was gone, good. But the fact that my personal tragedy had become a workplace management issue made everything feel that much more real, that much more humiliating. Back at my desk, I found myself staring at my computer screen without seeing it. Christina had been texting regularly, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. Why wouldn't I talk to her? Why was I punishing her like this? Didn't 10 years of marriage deserve at least a conversation? I'd stopped responding after the first week. What was there to say? Every time I thought about sitting across from her, hearing her explanations and excuses, my stomach clenched with such visceral pain that I could barely breathe. But as I sat there half-heartedly reviewing a project proposal, a new thought emerged through the fog of grief. I needed closure. Not for her sake, but for mine. I needed to look her in the eye, not in the immediate aftermath of Discovery when shock had numbed everything, but now, with 2 weeks of perspective, with the reality of our situation fully sunk in. I texted her, "We can talk. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. The diner on Maple." Her response came seconds later. "Thank you, James. I'll be there." I chose the diner deliberately, a public place where neither of us could make a scene, neutral territory that held no significance for our relationship. I arrived early and took a booth in the back. Ordering coffee I didn't want just to have something to do with my hands. Christina walked in at exactly 7, scanning the half-empty restaurant until she spotted me. Even through my anger, I couldn't deny the physical reaction I still had to her. The woman I'd loved for 12 years, married for almost 10. She was beautiful in a simple blue dress I recognized, her hair pulled back, her face carefully made up, but unable to hide the shadows under her eyes. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. Up close, I could see that she'd lost weight, her cheekbones more prominent than before. Good, a vindictive part of me thought. Let her suffer too. "How are you?" she asked, then immediately grimaced. "Sorry, that's a stupid question." "Yes, it is," I agreed flatly. She flinched but pressed on. "James, I know I hurt you terribly. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way, but please believe me when I say it meant nothing. Stop. I held up a hand. If you're going to sit there and tell me that sleeping with my coworker for 7 months meant nothing, then this conversation is already over. Christina bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes. You're right. That was a terrible thing to say. It did mean something. It meant I was lost and confused and unhappy. Horatius Cookery, were you? I interrupted again, because that's news to me. We were planning a vacation to Greece just last month. You seemed pretty happy then. I was pretending, she burst out, then immediately lowered her voice when a couple at a nearby table looked over. I was pretending everything was fine because I didn't know how to tell you I was unhappy. But you knew how to tell David, I said coldly. You found the words for him, apparently. She closed her eyes briefly. I deserve that. I deserve your anger. But James, we built a life together. 10 years of marriage. Don't you think that's worth trying to save? I stared at her, genuinely baffled by her perspective. You already destroyed it, Christina. You broke something that can't be fixed. Trust isn't like a vase you can glue back together. Once it's shattered, it's gone. People recover from affairs, she insisted. Couples go to therapy. They work through it. Is that what you want? For us to sit in some therapist's office while you explain why you fucked my coworker in our bed for 7 months? While I try to understand and forgive like some kind of saint, the vulgarity felt foreign in my mouth, but I couldn't soften this. Not for her comfort. Christina flinched as if I'd slapped her. I want us to try, she whispered. I want a chance to make this right. I leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. Let me ask you something. If the situation were reversed, if you had come home to find me in our bed with another woman, would you be sitting here now, asking me for another chance? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. That's what I thought, I said quietly. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. You lied to my face day after day. You brought another man into our home, into our bed. There's no coming back from that. The waitress approached, looking uncomfortable, clearly sensing the tension between us. Can I get you folks anything? No, I said, not taking my eyes off Christina. I think we're done here. James, please. Christina reached for my hand, but I pulled away. We can't end things like this. Not after everything we've been through together. I stood up, dropping a few bills on the table for my untouched coffee. You ended things the moment you decided that our vows didn't matter. I'm just making it official. Oh, what does that mean? There was fear in her voice now. It means I'll be filing for divorce. My lawyer will contact you. Her face crumpled. You already have a lawyer? Yes. How long have you been planning this? Does it matter? I asked tiredly. The marriage is over, Christina. It has been for 7 months. I just didn't know it until 2 weeks ago. I walked out of the diner into the cool evening air, expecting to feel something, vindication perhaps, or at least relief at having finally said the word divorce out loud. Instead, I just felt empty, as if I'd left the last pieces of my former self behind in that booth. The next few weeks passed in a surreal haze of legal consultations and paperwork. I hired Amanda Chen, a divorce attorney known for her ruthless efficiency. She was expensive, but watching my life savings dissolve seemed like a small price to pay for extracting myself from this marriage as quickly and cleanly as possible. In a no-fault state like this one, infidelity doesn't necessarily impact the division of assets, Amanda explained during our first meeting, but it can influence other aspects of the settlement, depending on circumstances. What kind of circumstances? I asked, taking notes mechanically, as if this were just another work project and not the dismantling of my life. Financial infidelity alongside emotional infidelity, for instance. Did your wife spend significant marital assets on her affair partner? I hadn't even considered that possibility. I don't know. Our finances are mostly joint, but we each have personal accounts too. Amanda nodded. We'll want to look into that. Credit card statements, unusual withdrawals, gifts, hotels. People conducting affairs often leave financial footprints. The thought of Christina using our money to facilitate her betrayal, perhaps paying for hotel rooms with David when I was out of town, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the premeditation, the calculated deception. What else should I know? I asked. At this stage, it's important not to make any major financial moves without consulting me first. Don't empty joint accounts. Don't make large purchases. Don't sell assets. It could complicate things later. I nodded, jotting this down. Also, Amanda continued, her voice softening slightly. While I understand this is an emotionally charged situation, try to keep communication with your wife civil and documented. Text or email rather than phone calls when possible. If you do speak on the phone, follow up with an email summarizing what was discussed. That won't be a problem. I replied grimly. We're not exactly on speaking terms. That works too, Amanda said with a professional smile. Sometimes distance is the best approach. Now about the house. We spent the next hour discussing assets, debts, and the logistics of separation. I left her office with a folder full of documents to review and a hollow feeling in my chest. This was my life now, reducing 10 years of marriage to spreadsheets and legal terms. Christina moved out of our house and in with her sister a week after our diner meeting. She left me a long letter that I couldn't bring myself to read. It sat unopened on the kitchen counter for days before I finally stuffed it in a drawer. Whatever explanations or apologies it contained wouldn't change anything. I moved back into our house. My house now, at least until the divorce settlement was finalized. It was both comforting and excruciating to be surrounded by the remnants of our shared life. I slept in the guest room, unable to face our bedroom. I ordered a new mattress for that room and had the old one taken away, but still couldn't bring myself to sleep there. Too many memories, too much pain. Friends and family rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. My parents, who had always loved Christina like a daughter, were devastated but unequivocal in their support. My father, normally so reserved, hugged me fiercely when I told him what had happened. You deserve better, son, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Much better. My mother's reaction was more practical. She came over with cleaning supplies and spent a day helping me pack up Christina's remaining belongings, her mouth set in a thin, angry line the entire time. I never thought she would do something like this, she said as we boxed up Christina's books. The girl I thought I knew wouldn't have been capable of such cruelty. I thought I knew her too. I replied, carefully wrapping a framed photo of Christina with her parents before placing it in a box. Guess we were both wrong. Friends were divided, as friends often are in divorces. Some mutual friends awkwardly tried to remain neutral, withdrawing from both of us. Others took sides immediately. Mark and Diane, our neighbors for 7 years, stopped inviting Christina to their weekly dinners, but made a point of checking on me regularly. Lisa, Christina's best friend since college, unsurprisingly rallied to her defense, sending me a scathing email about forgiveness and second chances that I deleted without responding. My closest friend Eric flew in from Chicago when he heard the news. He arrived on my doorstep unannounced, a duffel bag in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. Jesus, you look like shit, he said by way of greeting. I couldn't help but laugh, the first genuine laugh in weeks. Thanks. You always know just what to say. Eric stayed for 3 days, sleeping on my couch, forcing me to eat regular meals and letting me talk when I needed to and sit in silence when I didn't. On his last night, after we'd made our way through most of the whiskey, he asked the question everyone seemed to be circling around. So what happens now? I stared into my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. Divorce. Moving on. Whab, whatever that looks like. Have you thought about what you want post-divorce? Besides not this? I hadn't, not really. I'd been so focused on surviving each day, on the mechanics of separation, that I hadn't allowed myself to imagine a future beyond it. I don't know, I admitted. Everything I wanted included her. Eric nodded, understanding. That'll change. Not today, maybe not next month, but it will. One day you'll wake up and realize you're thinking about what you want for yourself, not what you lost. Sounds nice in theory. It's not just theory. I watched my sister go through this, remember? 2 years after that asshole Brian cheated on her, she was happier than I'd ever seen her. Said the divorce was the best thing that ever happened to her. I tried to imagine feeling that way. Grateful for this betrayal, this pain. It seemed impossible. Give it time, Eric said, as if reading my thoughts. And in the meantime, don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. He gave me a knowing look. Anything involving slashed tires, public scenes, or ill-advised rebounds? I raised my glass in mock toast. No promises on the rebound part. But even as I said it, I knew the idea of being with someone else made me feel physically ill. The thought of trusting anyone again, of making myself vulnerable, was unimaginable. After Eric left, the house felt emptier than before. I tried to establish new routines, to reclaim spaces that had been ours and make them solely mine. I rearranged furniture, painted the living room a color Christina had always vetoed, bought new towels and sheets in colors and patterns I chose without considering anyone else's preferences. Small acts of independence that felt both liberating and desperately sad. Work continued to be my primary distraction. With David transferred to Denver, I could at least focus on my projects without the constant reminder of betrayal. My team was understanding about my occasional distraction, my shorter temper. Mark continued to check in regularly, offering support without prying. It was during one of these check-ins, about 6 weeks after Discovery Day, that something shifted in my perspective. The Anderson project is looking good, Mark said, reviewing my latest presentation. Clients happy, numbers are solid. You've done excellent work here, James, especially given everything. I nodded, accepting the compliment with the awkward grace of someone unused to praise. Thanks. It's been a good focus. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me. You know, I wasn't sure how you'd weather this. Some people fall apart completely. I still might, I admitted. Some days are better than others. But you're functioning. More than functioning, you're excelling. That says something about your resilience. His words stayed with me long after our meeting ended. Resilience. Was that what this was? It didn't feel like strength. It felt like survival. Like having no choice but to keep moving forward because the alternative was unthinkable. But that night, as I mindlessly scrolled through Netflix looking for something to distract me, I found myself thinking about resilience in a different way. About the difference between passively surviving a blow and actively reclaiming your life after it. I'd been doing the former, existing, functioning, but not truly living. Not making choices about what came next. Not thinking beyond the immediate pain. I opened my laptop and, on impulse, searched for divorce recovery. The results were predictable. Therapy options, support groups, self-help books with titles like Healing Your Heart and Starting Over After Betrayal. I was about to close the browser when a different type of article caught my eye. Finding Empowerment Through Divorce, How the End of My Marriage Became My New Beginning. The author described her journey from devastation to determination, how she'd eventually come to see her divorce not as something that happened to her, but as a catalyst for the life she truly wanted. It wasn't about toxic positivity or pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about channeling that pain into purpose. I read more articles, then found myself on forums where people shared their stories of betrayal and recovery. Some were still raw, still bleeding from fresh wounds like mine. Others wrote from the perspective of months or years later, offering hope that there was indeed life after this kind of devastation. One post in particular caught my attention. A man whose wife had also cheated described how he'd initially wanted nothing more than to hurt her as deeply as she'd hurt him. He'd fantasized about revenge, about public humiliation, about making her suffer. But ultimately, he wrote, the best revenge had been building a life so full and meaningful that when he eventually ran into his ex-wife years later, he felt nothing but a distant pity for the person who had once held such power over his happiness. I sat back considering this perspective. The idea resonated with something deep inside me. Not the notion of forgiving and forgetting, which seemed impossible, but of reclaiming power in a situation where I'd been rendered completely powerless. Christina had taken my choice away when she betrayed our marriage. She'd made unilateral decisions about our relationship without my knowledge or consent. But how I responded now, that was my choice. The future was mine to shape. For the first time since Discovery Day, I felt something other than pain and anger. A tiny spark of something that might eventually become hope. And the next morning, I woke up with a clearer head than I'd had in weeks. The pain wasn't gone. It still sat heavy in my chest like a physical weight. But alongside it was something new. Determination. I was going to get through this. Not just survive it, but emerge stronger. Different, but whole. I called Amanda Chen and asked for an update on the divorce proceedings. We're moving along as quickly as the system allows, she assured me. Christina's lawyer has been responsive, at least. No delaying tactics so far. And the financial investigation? Did you find anything? Amanda's voice took on a note of professional satisfaction. Actually, yes. There were several hotel charges on your joint credit card, high-end places mostly, and some significant jewelry purchases around Valentine's Day and what appears to be their 6-month anniversary. She made air quotes audible in her tone. The information should have hurt, but instead it just hardened my resolve. Can we use that? It strengthens our position in the settlement negotiation. Marital funds used explicitly to facilitate infidelity can sometimes be considered in the division of assets. Not guaranteed, but it gives us leverage. Good. I want this finished as quickly as possible. I need to move on. There was a brief pause on the line. That's a healthy attitude, James. Not everyone gets there so quickly. Are you working with a therapist? The question surprised me. No. Should I be? Many clients find it helpful. This is a significant trauma, even when you're handling it well on the surface. I hadn't thought of it as trauma before, but the word fit. This was a wound, a violent rupture in the fabric of my life. Just because I was functioning didn't mean I was healed. I'll think about it. I promised. After we hung up, I did more than think about it. I researched therapists specializing in divorce and betrayal trauma, made a few calls, and scheduled an appointment for the following week. It felt like another step toward reclaiming control, admitting I needed help and actively seeking it. That afternoon, I received a text from Christina. Can we talk? Please. Just for a few minutes. My immediate instinct was to ignore it, as I'd been doing with most of her messages. But my new resolve to take active control of my healing made me reconsider. Avoidance was passive. Engagement, on my terms, was active. I replied, about what specifically? Her response came quickly. Our anniversary party. Everyone's still expecting it to happen in 2 months. We need to decide what to tell people. I'd completely forgotten about the party. Before Discovery Day, we'd been planning a big celebration for our 10th anniversary. An intimate dinner for close friends and family at Le Jardin, an upscale French restaurant downtown. Invitations had gone out months ago. People had made travel arrangements. The irony struck me suddenly. Our marriage wouldn't even survive to see its 10th anniversary. We'd make it to 9 years and 10 months, officially. 9 years and 3 months in reality, if I counted from the start of her affair. I texted back, I'll handle it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as Christina composed and reconsidered her response. Finally, what does that mean? It means I'll contact the restaurant and the guests. You don't need to worry about it. More hesitation then. Okay. Thank you. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about all of this. So sorry. I didn't respond to that part. Her apologies meant nothing to me now. But as I set my phone down, an idea began to form. Vague at first, then with increasing clarity. An idea about the anniversary party. About closure. About reclaiming power in a situation where I'd been made to feel utterly powerless. What if I didn't cancel the party? What if instead I transformed it into something else entirely? The thought made my heart race. It was bold, possibly reckless, certainly not what my lawyer would advise. But the more I considered it, the more right it felt. Not as an act of revenge exactly, though there would be an element of that, but as a definitive ending, a public declaration that would leave no doubt about where things stood. I needed to end this chapter conclusively before I could truly begin the next one. And what better way than to use the very celebration that was meant to honor our marriage as the platform to declare its end? I spent the next hour pacing my living room, thinking through the logistics, the potential fallout, the emotional cost. It wouldn't be easy. It would require weeks of careful planning and absolute discretion. I'd have to maintain a facade not just with Christina, but with everyone in our lives. But I could do it. I was already living a double life in many ways, presenting a composed, functioning exterior while processing grief and rage privately. This would just be an extension of that division between public and private self. And the payoff, the closure, the reclamation of power, the chance to write the ending to this chapter on my own terms, would be worth it. I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. At the top, I typed Anniversary Party Revised Plan. Then I began to outline what would become the most meticulously orchestrated event of my life. Not a celebration of marriage, but its public dissolution. The first step was to ensure Christina wouldn't interfere with my plans. I texted her the next day. I've spoken with Le Jardin. They're keeping our reservation, but changing it to my name only. I'll handle communications with guests. Her response was predictably confused. What? Why are you keeping the reservation? We're getting divorced. I'm aware. I've decided to use the occasion to thank friends and family for their support during this difficult time. They've already arranged travel. It seems only right. It was a plausible explanation, thoughtful even. Christina would have no reason to question it. Oh, that makes sense, I guess. Should I? Will I be invited? I smiled grimly at my phone. No. James, please. We can at least be civil. These are my friends and family too. You can organize your own event for your support network. This one is mine. She didn't respond for several hours. When she finally did, her message was terse. Fine, but please let my parents know directly. I don't want them hearing about this from someone else. I'll call them tomorrow. I promised, though I had no intention of revealing my true plans to anyone, including her parents. They would find out along with everyone else. With that settled, I turned my attention to the logistics. The restaurant was already booked. The date set. exactly 2 months away, June 15th. Our actual anniversary was June 17th, but we'd chosen the Saturday before for convenience. Now the timing seemed perfect. A symbolic execution of our marriage just before its technical 10th year. I called Le Jardin and spoke with Margot, the events coordinator we'd worked with initially. Mr. Harmon, I was just about to reach out to confirm some details for your anniversary celebration. That's actually why I'm calling, I said smoothly. There's been a change in circumstances. My wife and I are separating. Oh, Margot's professional tone faltered slightly. I'm so sorry to hear that. Would you like to cancel the reservation? Our cancellation policy does require... No, I'd like to keep it, I interrupted. But I'd like to change the nature of the event. It will no longer be an anniversary celebration. I see. She recovered quickly, the consummate professional. What kind of event will it be now? I hesitated, considering how much to reveal. Margot had no personal connection to Christina or me. She was just doing her job. But discretion was essential. It will be a dinner for close friends and family. A private gathering during a difficult time. The rest of the details can remain the same. Menu, table arrangements, everything. Of course, Mr. Harmon. We'll make that adjustment in our system. Will Mrs. Harmon still be attending? No. And I'd appreciate your discretion regarding these changes. Some guests won't be aware of our situation until that evening. There was a brief pause, during which I imagined Margot trying to decode the subtext of my request. Finally, she said, Understood, Mr. Harmon. Your privacy is important to us. I'll handle this personally and brief only the staff who need to know. Thank you, Margot. I appreciate your understanding. Next, I needed to ensure that Christina wouldn't hear about my plans from mutual friends. I created a plausible cover story that I was planning a surprise element for the party and wanted to keep it secret. I sent carefully worded texts to our closest friends, swearing them to secrecy about any party details. Most responded with enthusiastic promises to keep the surprise under wraps, assuming I was planning something romantic despite our current separation. The irony wasn't lost on me. With the venue secured and potential leaks contained, I turned to the most crucial element of my plan, the divorce papers. I scheduled another meeting with Amanda Chen. I have a specific request, I said once we were seated in her office. I want the divorce papers prepared and ready for service by June 15th. Amanda raised an eyebrow. That's still 6 weeks away. We could file much sooner. I know, but I want them ready for service specifically on that date, not before. She studied me for a moment, her expression carefully neutral. May I ask why that date is significant? It would have been our 10th anniversary celebration, I explained. I've decided that's when I want to make the divorce official. A clean break on what was supposed to be a milestone. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough to make my request seem reasonable, perhaps even psychologically healthy, marking a clear transition from one life chapter to another. Amanda nodded slowly. That can be arranged. We'll have everything prepared for that date. How do you plan to serve her? The standard is through a process server, but given the sensitivity, I'll handle the service personally, I interrupted. Now both eyebrows rose. That's unusual and potentially fraught. Most clients prefer to distance themselves from that moment. I'm not most clients. This is something I need to do myself. Amanda leaned back in her chair, considering. It's not illegal for you to serve the papers yourself, but it's generally not recommended. Emotions run high in that moment. Things can be said or done that later complicate proceedings. I understand the risks. This is important to me. She sighed, recognizing the determination in my voice. Very well. We'll have everything prepared for you to serve on June 15th. But James, she added, her tone softening slightly, whatever closure you're seeking from this, I hope you find it. Just be careful not to create new wounds in the process of trying to heal old ones. Her words gave me pause. Was that what I was doing? Creating new wounds? Or was I finally taking control of a narrative that had been wrested from me? The line between justice and revenge, between closure and cruelty, suddenly seemed blurrier than before. But as I left her office, the image of Christina and David in our bed flashed through my mind again, as vivid as the day I discovered them. The familiar surge of pain and humiliation reinforced my resolve. This wasn't about hurting Christina, though I couldn't deny a part of me wanted her to experience even a fraction of the pain she'd caused. This was about reclaiming my dignity, about ending this chapter on my terms rather than hers. The divorce papers would be ready. The venue was secured. The guests would be there, still believing they were coming to celebrate a milestone anniversary. All the pieces were falling into place. Now I just needed to maintain the facade for 6 more weeks. To everyone in my life, but especially to Christina. She couldn't suspect what I was planning. The element of surprise was essential. Without it, the impact would be diminished, the power shift incomplete. I drove home from Amanda's office with a strange sense of calm. For the first time since Discovery Day, I felt like I was moving towards something. Not just away from pain. It might not be the healthiest form of closure, but it was the one I needed. The weeks leading up to June 15th passed in a blur of preparation and performance. On the surface, I maintained the appearance of someone moving through the stages of divorce with appropriate gravity but no ulterior motives. I attended my therapy sessions, where I spoke honestly about my pain and anger, but carefully avoided mentioning my plans for the anniversary party. I showed up for work, met deadlines, even occasionally socialized with friends. Meanwhile, I methodically laid the groundwork for what I'd come to think of as my closure event. I confirmed with every guest, emphasizing the importance of their presence without revealing the true nature of the gathering. I had several conversations with Margot at Le Jardin, finalizing menu details and seating arrangements. I even chose a new suit for the occasion. Charcoal gray with a subtle blue pinstripe, a stark departure from my usual conservative style. Christina continued to text occasionally. Her messages evolved from desperate pleas for reconciliation to resigned updates about practical matters. She'd found a more permanent apartment. She was seeing a therapist of her own. She hoped I was doing okay. I responded minimally, just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough to encourage more communication. 3 weeks before the event, I received a text that momentarily shook my resolve. I heard you're still having the party at Le Jardin. James, what are you really planning? My heart raced as I read it. Had someone leaked information? Had she somehow discovered my intentions? I forced myself to wait an hour before responding, crafting my reply carefully. Like I told you, it's a gathering to thank the people who've supported me. Nothing more. Why Le Jardin? Why that specific date? It feels deliberate, like you're trying to hurt me. I could almost hear the suspicion in her voice, but also the hurt. For a brief moment, I questioned what I was doing. Was this elaborate plan really about closure, or was it just sophisticated revenge? Was I any better than her if my goal was to cause pain? But then I remembered the hotel charges on our joint credit card. The jewelry she'd accepted from David. 7 months of lies told directly to my face. My resolve hardened again. The reservation was non-refundable. I lied. And people have already made travel arrangements for that date. It's practical, not personal. She didn't respond after that, and I hoped she'd accepted my explanation. I couldn't risk her interfering now, not when everything was so carefully arranged. 2 weeks before the event, I met with Amanda Chen one final time to review the divorce papers. Everything was in order, division of assets clearly outlined, terms fair but firm. Christina would be surprised but not blindsided by the contents. Most of it aligned with what our lawyers had already been discussing. Are you sure about serving these yourself? Amanda asked again as I prepared to leave. A process server is still an option. I'm sure, I replied without hesitation. This is something I need to do personally. She handed me the folder containing the papers, her expression professionally neutral, but with a hint of concern in her eyes. Call me after it's done. And remember, once these are served, there's no going back. Going back was never an option, I said quietly. The night before the event, I barely slept. I lay awake in the guest room, still unable to reclaim the master bedroom, rehearsing what I would say, how I would act, the exact moment I would reveal my true purpose to Christina and our assembled friends and family. Every scenario I imagined ended differently. In some, Christina broke down in tears. In others, she raged, made a scene. In a few, she simply accepted the papers with quiet dignity, which was somehow the most unsatisfying outcome of all. Morning came after a fitful few hours of sleep. I showered, shaved carefully, and dressed in my new suit. The divorce papers sat on my dresser in their inconspicuous manila folder, the culmination of months of pain and planning. As I slipped the folder into my briefcase, my phone pinged with a text from Christina. Whatever you're planning tonight, please remember that there are people coming who care about both of us. Don't make them choose sides. The message unsettled me. It suggested she knew, or at least strongly suspected, that my intentions for the evening went beyond what I'd claimed. But it was too late to change course now. Everything was in motion. I didn't respond to her text. Instead, I took a final look around the house, our house soon to be sold as part of the divorce settlement, and walked out the door. Whatever happened tonight, I wouldn't be returning to this place as the same person who left it. That much I knew for certain. Le Jardin was a 20-minute drive from my house, but I left early, needing time to center myself before guests arrived. The restaurant was in an elegantly converted Victorian mansion, with multiple private dining rooms and a reputation for discretion that made it popular for everything from marriage proposals to business negotiations. Tonight, it would host something altogether different. Margot met me at the entrance, professional and poised as always. Good evening, Mr. Harmon. Everything is prepared according to your specifications. The private dining room is ready, and the staff has been briefed. Thank you, Margot. And remember, absolute discretion, she finished with a nod. Of course, she led me to the private dining room, a beautifully appointed space with dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the restaurant's manicured gardens. A long table dominated the center of the room, elegantly set for 25. Our closest friends and family, the people who had been witnesses to our marriage and would now be witnesses to its official end. At the head of the table sat 2 chairs, originally intended for Christina and me. I instructed the staff to remove one of them. There would be no pretense of partnership tonight. As I surveyed the room, a wave of doubt washed over me. Was I really going to do this? Transform what should have been a celebration of love into a public declaration of its failure? The magnitude of what I had planned suddenly seemed overwhelming. But then I touched the briefcase containing the divorce papers, and my resolve returned. This wasn't about public humiliation. It was about truth, about refusing to perpetuate the lies that had destroyed my marriage. It was about taking back control of my narrative. Guests began arriving at 7. By 7:30, the room was nearly full, the air buzzing with conversation and laughter. These were people who knew about our separation, but who had come tonight believing they were supporting me through a difficult time. They greeted me with warm hugs and concerned inquiries about my well-being. I answered with practiced responses, neither too upbeat nor too despondent. My parents arrived last, my mother embracing me tightly, my father clasping my shoulder with uncharacteristic emotion. "We're so proud of how you're handling this, son," he said quietly. "It takes strength to face friends and family at a time like this." If only he knew what I was really planning. At precisely 8 o'clock, I took my place at the head of the table and tapped my glass for attention. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning expectantly toward me. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "As you know, this gathering was originally planned as a celebration of my and Christina's 10th wedding anniversary." Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the room. I continued, sticking to the script I'd rehearsed countless times. "Obviously, circumstances have changed, but I wanted to keep this reservation, to have this evening with all of you, because each of you has been important to our story. You've been witnesses to our relationship from the beginning. Some of you were at our first date." I nodded to Eric. "Some at our engagement," a glance toward Christina's parents, who looked uncomfortable but supportive, "and all of you at our wedding." I paused, taking a sip of water to steady myself for what came next. This was the moment of truth, the pivot from what they expected to hear to what I actually intended to say. What many of you don't know is the full story of why our marriage ended. Out of respect for privacy, both Christina's and mine, I've shared only that we're separating. But tonight, I want to tell you the truth. A tense silence fell over the room. I could see confusion on some faces, alarm on others. Christina's parents exchanged a worried glance. 3 months ago, I came home early from work and found Christina in our bed with my coworker, David Winters. They had been having an affair for 7 months. Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Christina's mother covered her mouth with her hand. Her father's face hardened into a mask of shock and disappointment. "I'm not telling you this to villainize Christina or to ask you to take sides," I continued, though part of me, the still raw, wounded part, was doing exactly that. "I'm sharing this because I'm tired of secrets. I'm tired of protecting the feelings of someone who didn't protect mine. And because tonight isn't just about acknowledging the end of our marriage, it's about making it official." I reached for my briefcase, unlatched it, and removed the manila folder. The room had gone completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. This folder contains divorce papers, prepared by my lawyer and ready to be served. All that's missing is delivery to Christina. And that's why I've asked you all here tonight, to witness the end of this chapter of my life, just as you witnessed its beginning. More shocked whispers, a few uncomfortable coughs. This was clearly not what anyone had expected from the evening. I could see disapproval on some faces, confusion on others, and on a few, particularly among those who had been betrayed in their own relationships, a glimmer of something like understanding. I was about to continue when the door to the private dining room swung open, and Christina walked in. My heart stopped. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't invited. How had she known? But as I took in her appearance, the elegant black dress, her hair swept up, makeup carefully applied, I realized she must have planned this. She hadn't stumbled upon our gathering by accident. She had deliberately chosen to come, perhaps hoping to confront me, to stop whatever she suspected I was planning. She stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, the single chair at the head of the table, the shocked faces of our friends and family, the folder in my hands. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment, I saw her understand exactly what was happening. "James," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "Don't do this." I found my voice, though it came out rougher than I'd intended. "And, how did you know about tonight?" "Lisa told me," she replied, gesturing to her best friend, who looked miserably guilty. "She thought I should know you were still having our anniversary party. She thought maybe you were going to propose a reconciliation." The bitter irony of that misunderstanding might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so tense. Instead, I just shook my head. "That's not why we're here." "So I gathered," Christina said, her eyes flicking to the folder in my hands. "Divorce papers? Really, James? This is how you want to do this? Ambushing me in front of everyone we know? Ambushing you?" I repeated incredulously. "That's rich coming from the woman I found in our bed with another man. If anyone was ambushed in this marriage, it was me." Christina flinched, then glanced around the room, clearly registering that everyone now knew the truth about why we were separating. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment or anger. Perhaps both. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice dropping. "I've acknowledged that. I've apologized. But this," she gestured around the room, "this deliberate public humiliation is cruel, and you know it." Part of me knew she was right. This was cruel. It was calculated to hurt her, to make her feel a fraction of the pain and humiliation I had felt. But I was too far down this path to turn back now. "You want to talk about cruelty?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "How about lying to my face every day for 7 months? How about bringing another man into our home, into our bed? How about spending our money on hotel rooms and jewelry for your affair? If you want to discuss cruelty, Christina, let's start there." The room was so silent that the sound of Christina's sharp intake of breath was clearly audible. She took a step toward me, her composure cracking slightly. "I hurt you terribly, and I will regret that for the rest of my life," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "But this isn't about healing, James. This is about revenge, and it won't give you what you're looking for. It won't take away the pain." Her words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Was this really about closure, or was it just about making her hurt the way I hurt? Had I become someone I didn't recognize in my quest to reclaim control? I looked around the room at the uncomfortable, pitying faces of our friends and family. This wasn't how I had imagined this moment. In my mind, it had been triumphant, empowering, a decisive reclaiming of my narrative. Instead, I felt exposed, my pain and anger and desire for retribution on display for everyone to see. But it was too late to turn back. The truth was out. The papers were here. All that remained was to complete what I had started. I stepped toward Christina, the folder extended. "Christina Elizabeth Harmon, I'm serving you with divorce papers. Our marriage is over. It has been since the moment you decided to betray everything we built together." She didn't take the folder. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't expected. Not anger or defiance, but a deep, profound sadness. "I know our marriage is over, James. I've accepted that. I don't blame you for wanting a divorce. You have every right. But this spectacle," she gestured around the room, "this isn't about ending our marriage. It's about making sure I suffer publicly. And that isn't the man I married. That isn't who you are." Her words landed like a physical blow. Was she right? Had my pain transformed me into someone unrecognizable? Someone capable of orchestrating an elaborate public humiliation under the guise of closure? I looked down at the folder in my hands, then back at Christina, the woman I had loved for 12 years. The woman who had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. The woman who now stood before me, vulnerable and exposed, yet somehow maintaining more dignity than I was in this moment. The truth hit me with sudden clarity. This elaborate plan, this public spectacle, wasn't giving me power. It was revealing how powerless I still felt, how much her betrayal still controlled me, still dictated my actions and emotions. True power would be walking away. True healing would come from releasing the anger, not indulging it. I lowered the folder slightly. You're right, I said quietly, the words almost painful to speak. This isn't who I am, or at least it's not who I want to be. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Christina's expression softened slightly, relief visible in her eyes. I turned to address our guests. I apologize to all of you for putting you in this position. This was misguided. What happens between Christina and me should remain between us. Murmurs of understanding rippled through the room. My mother gave me a small, approving nod. My father's expression was unreadable, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. I turned back to Christina. The divorce still stands, I said firmly. That's non-negotiable. But not like this. Not as a public performance. She nodded, accepting this. I understand. I gestured toward the door. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. Christina nodded again and stepped back into the hallway. I followed, closing the door behind us, leaving our bewildered guests to process what they had just witnessed. In the quiet of the hallway, we stood facing each other, the divorce papers still in my hand. Despite everything, despite the pain and anger and disappointment, there was a strange sense of intimacy in this moment, a recognition that only the two of us could truly understand what had been lost between us. I really am sorry, James, Christina said softly. For the affair, for the lies, for all of it. I know words can't fix what I broke, but I need you to know that. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. After a moment, I found my voice. I'm sorry too. Not for wanting a divorce, that's still the right decision, but for this. I gestured toward the dining room. It was beneath me. It was beneath both of us. She agreed. She reached for the folder, and this time I let her take it. I'll have my lawyer review these and respond through proper channels. Thank you. We stood there for another moment, the weight of a decade together, the love, the betrayal, the end, hanging in the air between us. What do we tell them? Christina finally asked, nodding toward the dining room. I considered this. The truth, I suppose, that we're getting divorced, that it's painful and complicated, that we're both trying to find our way through it with whatever dignity we can salvage. She nodded slowly. And then we go our separate ways. I said simply, we build new lives that don't include each other. Christina's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I hope you find happiness, James. I really do. I hope you find whatever you were looking for. I replied, unable to wish her happiness yet, but no longer actively wishing her pain either. We returned to the dining room together, where our friends and family waited in uncomfortable silence. Standing side by side for what would likely be the last time, we explained that we were indeed divorcing, that the process would be handled privately from now on, and that we appreciated everyone's support through this difficult transition. Dinner proceeded in a strained but civil atmosphere. Christina left shortly after the main course, exchanging brief, subdued goodbyes with those closest to her. I stayed until the end, accepting condolences and well wishes with a stoicism that had become my default mode. As the last guest departed, I found myself alone in the private dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be a pivotal moment in my healing journey. It hadn't gone as planned. The vindication I'd anticipated had never materialized. Yet somehow I felt lighter than I had in months. Not healed, that would take much longer, but perhaps a step closer to the person I wanted to be on the other side of this pain. Someone who could acknowledge hurt without being defined by it. Someone who could eventually release anger without denying it existed. I gathered my belongings and left Le Jardin, nodding a final thanks to Margot as I passed the reception desk. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, the stars visible despite the city lights. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely for what felt like the first time in months. The divorce would proceed. Christina and I would go our separate ways. The pain would eventually fade. Life would continue, different than I'd planned, but still mine to shape. As I drove home, to the house that would soon no longer be mine, I realized that true closure wouldn't come from a single dramatic moment. It would come gradually through the quiet daily work of rebuilding, through therapy sessions and honest conversations with friends, through new experiences that had nothing to do with my marriage or its end. The revenge I'd so carefully planned had ultimately been a detour, not a destination. The real journey was just beginning. I woke up the morning after the Le Jardin disaster with a pounding headache and the distinct feeling that I'd narrowly avoided becoming someone I didn't want to be. The previous night's events played on a loop in my mind. The shocked faces of our friends and family, Christina's unexpected arrival, the moment when her words cut through my carefully constructed justifications. This isn't about healing, James. This is about revenge. She'd been right. The realization sat heavily in my chest as I made coffee in the kitchen that still held too many memories. What had I been thinking? The elaborate setup, the public humiliation, the calculated timing, it was so far from who I'd always believed myself to be. The man who'd planned that vengeful spectacle was a stranger to me, shaped by pain and betrayal into someone I barely recognized. My phone had been buzzing since early morning. I glanced at it reluctantly. 12 missed calls, 27 text messages. Everyone from last night wanting to check in, to make sure I was okay, to understand what had happened. I couldn't face any of them yet. Instead, I took my coffee onto the back deck, where Christina and I had spent countless Sunday mornings planning our future together. A future that now existed only as a ghost of what might have been. The divorce papers were still in Christina's possession. She would review them with her lawyer, and then the formal process would begin. Despite the previous night's detour into potential cruelty, I still wanted the divorce finalized as quickly as possible. That much hadn't changed. What had changed was my understanding of how to get there. Not through revenge or public declarations, but through the mundane procedural channels designed for dissolving a partnership that had once seemed unbreakable. My phone rang again. This time I checked the caller ID, Amanda Chen. My lawyer would definitely want to know what had happened last night. I took a deep breath and answered. James, I've been trying to reach you. Christina's lawyer called me this morning. What happened last night? I winced at the concern in her voice. Not what I'd planned. I gathered that much. Do you want to elaborate? I sighed and gave her the condensed version. My plan for a public serving, Christina's unexpected appearance, our eventual decision to handle things privately. I see, Amanda said when I'd finished. Her tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear the relief beneath it. So she has the papers now, and her lawyer will be reviewing them. That's actually a good outcome, procedurally speaking. Less drama usually means a smoother process. I know. It was a mistake, the whole public spectacle thing. I wasn't thinking clearly. Amanda's voice softened slightly. Pain makes people do things they wouldn't ordinarily consider. The important thing is you recognized it and course-corrected. Now we can proceed with the actual legal work without the complication of heightened emotions. That's what I want, I assured her. Just get it done as efficiently as possible. We will. I'll be in touch once I hear from her lawyer. She paused. And James, be kind to yourself. Divorce is one of the most stressful life events a person can experience. It's normal to have moments of poor judgment along the way. After we hung up, I sat with her words for a while. Be kind to yourself. It seemed like such a simple instruction, yet I had no idea how to follow it. For months, I'd been fueled by anger. At Christina, at David, at myself for not seeing what was happening right under my nose. Beneath that anger lay a deep well of hurt and humiliation that I hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge, let alone process. My phone buzzed with a text from Eric. Checking in. That was intense last night. Call when you can. I set the phone aside, not ready for that conversation either. Instead, I did something I hadn't done since Discovery Day. I walked through the entire house, really looking at it for the first time in months. This house had been our dream, purchased 6 years ago when we both received promotions within months of each other. We'd spent weekends painting walls, replacing fixtures, turning the generic suburban structure into something that felt like ours. Now, everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of our shared life. The kitchen backsplash we'd installed together, arguing good-naturedly about the pattern, the living room bookshelves that mixed her literary fiction with my historical biographies, the spare room we'd left intentionally empty, silently awaiting the children we'd someday decide to have. I entered our bedroom, the scene of the betrayal, for the first time since that day. I'd been sleeping in the guest room, retrieving clothes from the master bedroom in hurried missions, never staying long enough to really see the space. Now I forced myself to stand in the doorway and look. Christina had taken the bedding when she moved out, leaving the mattress bare. Small mercy. The room felt hollow, emptied not just of her physical presence, but of all the meaning it had once held. This had been our sanctuary, our most private space. Now it was just a room with a bed I could never sleep in again. As I stood there, something unexpected happened. Instead of the familiar surge of anger and humiliation, I felt a wave of pure grief wash over me. Not just for the loss of my marriage or the betrayal of my trust, but for the loss of the future we'd planned, the children we might have had. The quiet, ordinary happiness we might have built together over decades. For the first time since Discovery Day, I allowed myself to really feel that grief. I sat on the floor of our bedroom and wept. Not the controlled, angry tears I'd shed in private moments over the past months, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some previously untapped reservoir of sorrow. I cried until I was empty, until the physical act of crying had exhausted itself. When I finally quieted, sitting there on the carpet with my back against the wall, I felt different. Not healed, not even close, but somehow more complete, as if I'd finally acknowledged the full extent of what had been lost. In that moment of raw honesty with myself, I realized that revenge had never been what I truly wanted. What I wanted was understanding of how we'd gotten here, of who I was now that this central relationship in my life had imploded, of how to move forward when the future I'd imagined had vanished overnight. I picked up my phone and texted Dr. Levine, the therapist I'd seen only twice before abandoning the process to focus on my revenge plan. "Are you available this week? I think I'm ready to do the real work now." 3 days after the Le Jardin incident, I met Christina at a coffee shop halfway between our respective new homes. It was her suggestion. Neutral territory, public enough to discourage emotional scenes but quiet enough for a private conversation. She was already seated when I arrived, 2 cups on the table in front of her. "I got you a black coffee," she said as I sat down, "unless your order has changed." "It hasn't," I replied, taking the cup. "Thanks." We sat in awkward silence for a moment, both struggling to find the right opening for this conversation. Christina looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes despite careful makeup. I wondered if I looked equally changed to her. "My lawyer reviewed the papers," she finally said. "The terms are fair. More than fair, actually." I nodded. I didn't want to fight over details. "I just want this finished." "I understand." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger, a nervous habit I recognized from our years together. "James, I know you don't want my apologies anymore, but I need to say this. What I did was unforgivable. Not just the affair, but how I handled everything afterward. The lying, the gaslighting when you started to suspect something was wrong, all of it. There's no excuse." I'd heard variations of this apology before, but something about her tone now seemed different, less focused on seeking forgiveness and more on simply acknowledging the truth. "Why did you come to Le Jardin that night?" I asked, the question that had been nagging at me. "You knew you weren't invited." Christina sighed. "Lisa told me you were still having the party, but had been secretive about the details. We both thought, that maybe you were planning some grand gesture of reconciliation." She gave a small, sad laugh. "Obviously, we were way off base. Obviously, when I realized what you were actually planning, I was shocked. It seemed so calculated, so unlike you. The James I knew would never orchestrate something like that. The James you knew wouldn't have needed to." I replied more sharply than I'd intended. She nodded, accepting the blow. "A fair point. I guess what I'm struggling to understand is, why that approach? Why not just have your lawyer send the papers like everyone else does?" I considered deflecting, keeping my motivations private. But what was the point? We were ending our marriage. The least we could do was be honest with each other now. "I wanted you to feel what I felt," I admitted. "The public humiliation. The sense that everything you thought was real had been a lie. I wanted witnesses to your pain, the way there were witnesses to mine when I found out about the affair through office gossip." Christina winced. "I didn't know people at your office knew. David wasn't exactly discreet. Apparently, he'd hinted to several colleagues that he was seeing a married woman. After I found you together and he was suddenly transferred to Denver, it didn't take much for people to connect the dots." "God, James, I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked slightly. "I never wanted to humiliate you." "But you did," I said flatly. "That's the reality we're dealing with. You humiliated me, destroyed our marriage, and upended my entire life. And for a while, I wanted to return the favor." "What changed?" she asked quietly. "At Le Jardin. You had everything set up exactly how you wanted it, and then you stopped." I thought about this, trying to articulate the shift I'd experienced in that moment. I realized I was becoming someone I didn't want to be, someone defined by bitterness and revenge. And I realized that no amount of making you suffer would actually heal what's broken in me. Christina's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could fix what I broke. In you, in us." "You can't," I said simply. "No one can. That's something I'm just starting to accept. This isn't a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be lived with." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "So where does that leave us?" Practically speaking, we move forward with the divorce. We separate our lives as cleanly as possible. We try to minimize contact until we both had time to heal. And after that, I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had been my entire world for so long, now becoming a stranger again. I don't know, Christina. I can't see that far ahead right now. I understand. She hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I ended things with David completely. Right after you found us. It was never about him specifically. Then what was it about? The question escaped before I could stop it. The one I'd been avoiding asking directly because I feared the answer might destroy what remained of my self-worth. Christina looked down at her hands. It wasn't about you lacking something, if that's what you're asking. You are a good man, a good husband. It was about me. My own insecurities, my fears about turning 35 and wondering if this was all there was to life. My stupid idea that passion had to look like secrecy and risk rather than comfort and consistency. She looked up, meeting my eyes. I was wrong. I know that now. But I didn't have the courage or the wisdom to figure it out before I destroyed everything. Her explanation should have provided some comfort. It wasn't that I had been insufficient, but that she had been searching for something that didn't exist in the way she'd imagined. But all I felt was a profound sadness. Such an ordinary, predictable crisis of meaning, and instead of turning toward me with her doubts and questions, she'd turned away, seeking answers in deception and betrayal. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said finally, echoing my words from Lejardin, but meaning them more genuinely this time. I really do. You too, James. She hesitated, then asked, will you be okay? Financially, I mean. I know the house was important to you, but it makes sense to sell it. I'll be fine. The promotion came with a significant raise, and honestly, I don't think I could live in that house anymore anyway. Too many memories. Christina nodded understanding. And ... Personally? Do you have support? People you can talk to? The question touched me unexpectedly. Despite everything, a small part of her still cared about my well-being. I started seeing a therapist, and Eric's been checking in regularly. My parents too. I'm not alone. Good. That's good. She glanced at her watch. I should go. I have a therapy appointment myself. We stood awkwardly, neither sure how to end this strange liminal meeting. No longer a married couple, but not quite separate individuals either. Christina solved the dilemma by extending her hand formally, as if we were business associates concluding a meeting. Thank you for meeting with me, and for not going through with your original plan at Lejardin. I shook her hand, the touch both familiar and foreign. Take care, Christina. As I watched her walk away, I realized that for the first time since Discovery Day, I was looking at her without that gut-wrenching combination of love and hatred that had become my default. Instead, I felt something closer to compassion, not forgiveness, not yet, but an understanding that she was a flawed human being who had made devastating choices and now had to live with them, just as I had to live with the aftermath. It wasn't closure, not completely, but it was a step in that direction. The divorce proceeded with surprising efficiency once both Christina and I committed to a non-adversarial approach. By August, just 2 months after the Lejardin incident, we'd finalized the division of assets, agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds, and establish separate financial lives. The only thing left was the waiting period required by the state before the divorce could be legally finalized. During those months, I developed a new routine: weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Levine, who specialized in betrayal trauma, regular dinners with friends who had proven themselves true allies during the worst of the crisis, Friday calls with my parents, who had shifted from shocked disbelief to protective anger to calm support of whatever choices I made going forward. I found an apartment in a neighborhood I'd always liked, but Christina had found too urban for her taste. It was a former industrial space converted to lofts, high ceilings, exposed brick, large windows that filled the space with natural light. Nothing like our suburban house with its traditional layout and careful landscaping. The difference was deliberate. I needed a physical environment that didn't echo with memories or expectations. Work became more than just a distraction. The promotion I'd received shortly before Discovery Day came with new responsibilities that challenged me in ways I found unexpectedly satisfying. I immersed myself in projects that required creative problem-solving and collaboration, building stronger relationships with colleagues who now knew me as James, the innovative team leader, rather than James, the guy whose wife cheated on him with David from accounting. Mark, my boss, continued to be supportive without being intrusive. You've really stepped up these past few months, he commented during a quarterly review in September. The Anderson project exceeded expectations, and client feedback has been universally positive. Thank you. The work has been grounding. Mark nodded, understanding. Sometimes the thing that saves us is simply having somewhere to direct our energy. Somewhere it can make a tangible difference. He was right. Amid the chaos of my personal life, work provided structure, purpose, and measurable results. Small victories that reminded me I was still capable, still valuable, still moving forward despite everything. The house sold quickly for slightly above asking price. Signing the closing documents was surreal, officially ending our ownership of the space that had contained so many chapters of our story. I felt a complex mixture of relief and grief as I walked through the empty rooms one final time, each now stripped of the personal touches that had made it ours. Just walls and floors again, ready for someone else's life to unfold within them. As part of my healing process, Dr. Levine had encouraged me to reconnect with interests and relationships I'd neglected during my marriage. Recovery isn't just about processing what happened, she explained. It's also about rediscovering who you are outside of that relationship and that trauma. Following her advice, I joined a local photography club, reviving a passion I'd set aside years ago when work and marriage had consumed more of my time. Every Saturday morning, I met with a group of fellow enthusiasts for urban photo walks, capturing the city from angles I'd never noticed before. There was something therapeutic about viewing the world through a lens, focusing on composition and light, rather than on my own churning emotions. It was during one of these photo walks in early October that I met Nadia. She was new to the group, a graphic designer with an eye for architectural details and a dry sense of humor that made me laugh for the first time in months. We struck up an easy conversation about vintage cameras that continued over coffee after the walk ended. "So what brought you to the photography club?" she asked as we sat in a small cafe, reviewing our morning's shots. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, though it was close, and I'd become wary of defining myself by that experience. "I used to be into photography years ago," I said finally. "Recently decided it was time to pick it up again." Nadia nodded, seeming to sense there was more to the story, but not pressing. Life has a way of making us set things aside, doesn't it? The important stuff gets squeezed out by the urgent. Exactly. What about you? Just moved here from Chicago 3 months ago for a job, trying to meet people who don't work in my office. She grinned. Turns out it's harder to make friends at 37 than it was at 22. The conversation flowed easily from there, about our respective careers, favorite photographers, places we'd traveled. It wasn't flirtatious exactly, just genuinely engaging. For 2 hours, I didn't think about Christina, or the divorce, or the betrayal. I was just a guy talking to an interesting woman about shared interests. As we prepared to leave, Nadia hesitated slightly. "This was really nice. Would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime?" "As friends," she added quickly. "I really am just trying to build a social circle here." The clarification made the invitation easier to accept. "I'd like that. Friends is good. I'm kind of in a transitional period myself. Recently divorced?" She guessed, her expression sympathetic rather than prying. "Almost. Final paperwork should come through any day now." Nadia nodded, understanding. See, been there. Well, not married, but an 8-year relationship that ended badly. Take it from a veteran of the transitional period, it gets better. Cliché, but true. We exchanged numbers before parting ways, and I walked back to my apartment feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd met someone, I was nowhere near ready for that, but because for a few hours I'd been present in a new experience, engaged with the moment rather than trapped in the painful past or anxious about the uncertain future. That night, I called Eric to catch up. We'd been talking regularly, but our conversations had revolved almost exclusively around my divorce and healing process. This time, I found myself sharing anecdotes from the photo walk and my conversation with Nadia. "Sounds like you had an actual good day," Eric observed, the smile evident in his voice. "I did," I realized, somewhat surprised. It was just normal. Not amazing, not terrible. Just a pleasant Saturday doing something I enjoy. That's huge, man. Seriously. 6 months ago, you couldn't imagine ever having a normal day again. He was right. In those first dark weeks after Discovery Day, the pain had been so all-consuming that the idea of ever feeling ordinary contentment again had seemed impossible. Yet here I was, having coffee with a new acquaintance, taking photos, appreciating a beautiful fall day, living. It's strange, I admitted. Sometimes I feel guilty for having good moments, like I'm betraying how serious the hurt was. That's your brain playing tricks on you, Eric said firmly. Being happy doesn't invalidate what you went through. It just means you're healing. My therapist says something similar. That healing isn't linear. Smart therapist. Listened to her. After we hung up, I found myself looking through the photos I'd taken that day. Close-ups of architectural details, interesting shadows cast by morning light, candid shots of street life. One in particular caught my attention. A middle-aged couple walking hand in hand through the farmer's market, both laughing at some private joke. I'd captured them in a moment of unself-conscious joy, the kind that comes from deep familiarity and enduring affection. 6 months ago, such an image would have triggered bitter thoughts about what I'd lost, what Christina had thrown away. Tonight, I could appreciate it simply as a beautiful moment between two people. A possibility rather than a painful reminder. Progress, I thought. Small, incremental, but real. 2 weeks later, I received the official notification that my divorce had been finalized. It arrived via email from Amanda Chen's office on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of a presentation to clients. I didn't see it until hours later, when the meeting had ended and I was back at my desk, catching up on correspondence. The subject line was simple: divorce decree finalized. The email itself was brief and professional, informing me that the court had processed all necessary paperwork and that I was now legally divorced. Attached was a PDF of the official decree, along with instructions for obtaining certified copies should I need them for administrative purposes like changing my name on accounts or updating my marital status with various institutions. I stared at the screen for several minutes, trying to identify exactly what I was feeling. Relief, certainly. A marriage that had effectively ended 7 months ago was now legally dissolved. But there was sadness too, a final acknowledgement that a significant chapter of my life had closed definitively. I printed a copy of the decree, holding the physical evidence of this transition. Such a mundane-looking document to represent such a seismic change. A few pages of legal terminology, a judge's signature, and officially, the relationship that had defined a decade of my life no longer existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Christina. Just got the email. It's done. I hesitated before responding. This was likely to be one of our last direct communications for a while. We'd agreed to minimize contact as we both adjusted to our new, separate realities. Yes, I typed simply. It's done. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as she composed and reconsidered her response. Finally, I hope you find happiness, James. I mean that. I believed her. Despite everything, I didn't think Christina had ever intended to cause the pain she'd inflicted. Her choices had been selfish and destructive, but not malicious. There was a difference, though, in the worst moments of betrayal and its aftermath. I hadn't been able to see it. Thank you, I replied. I hope you find peace. It wasn't quite the same as wishing her happiness. I wasn't quite there yet, but it was honest. Peace was what we both needed after the turmoil of the past year. I slipped the divorce decree into my briefcase and focused on finishing the workday, responding to emails and reviewing project timelines with an outward composure that belied the emotional significance of the day. When 5 o'clock came, I declined an invitation from colleagues to join them for happy hour and headed home instead, needing space to process this milestone privately. My apartment welcomed me with the quiet, undemanding presence of a space that was entirely mine. No memories here, no ghosts of a shared past. Just the clean lines of furniture I'd chosen, photographs I'd taken displayed on walls I'd painted myself, books arranged according to my own incomprehensible system. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, not to numb any pain, but to mark the occasion with something that felt ceremonial. Sitting by the window overlooking the city as dusk settled, I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself, to survival, to the uncertain but open future that now stretched before me. My phone rang, Eric, of course. He'd set a calendar reminder for the date when the divorce was likely to be finalized. It's official, I said when I answered. Just got the decree today. How are you feeling? He asked, skipping past congratulations or condolences, neither of which would have felt quite right. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Relieved, sad, a little numb, but also lighter somehow. That makes sense. It's a big transition, even when it's expected. We talked for a while about practical matters, whether I'd take a trip somewhere to mark this new chapter, if I planned to tell extended family and colleagues about the finalization, how the holidays might look now that my status had officially changed. Ordinary questions that helped ground the abstract legal transition in everyday reality. After we hung up, I found myself doing something unexpected. I took out a notebook and began writing a letter to my past self, the person I'd been on Discovery Day, standing shocked in the doorway of my bedroom, watching my world collapse around me. "You will survive this," I wrote. "Not just survive, but eventually find your way back to some version of happiness. It won't be quick or easy. There will be days when the pain feels as fresh as it did in those first moments of discovery. But there will also be days of surprising peace, moments of connection, even glimpses of joy that remind you life continues beyond this devastation." I wrote for over an hour, filling pages with the wisdom I'd gained through these difficult months, about resilience, about the difference between forgiveness and healing, about the importance of allowing grief its full expression, rather than trying to circumvent it through anger or revenge. I wrote about the friends who had shown up in unexpected ways, and those who had drifted away when confronted with the messy reality of betrayal's aftermath. I wrote about therapy and photography and the simple pleasure of designing a living space that reflected only my own preferences. When I finished, I read through what I'd written, struck by how much I had learned, how much I had changed. The man who discovered his wife's betrayal 7 months ago and the man now holding this completed letter were different people. The pain had transformed me, not just broken me down, but rebuilt me with a deeper understanding of myself and what I wanted from life going forward. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Perhaps someday I'd read it again, when the memories of this period had begun to fade. Or perhaps I'd share it with someone else navigating the aftermath of betrayal, someone who needed to hear that there was an after to this particular kind of devastation. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months, as if the finalization of the divorce had released some last bit of tension I'd been unconsciously carrying. In the morning, I woke feeling clear-headed and surprisingly peaceful. Not happy exactly, but present, ready to begin this next chapter in earnest. As the holidays approached with a mixture of dread and curiosity, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all landmarks on the calendar that would now look entirely different without Christina. For nearly all of my adult life, these celebrations had involved her family alongside mine, traditions we'd built together, expectations we'd set as a couple. Many people find the first holiday season after divorce particularly challenging. Dr. Levine warned during a session in early November. There's a magnifying effect to these culturally significant days. They tend to highlight what's changed, what's been lost. "So what's the solution?" I asked. "Just grit my teeth and get through it?" She smiled. "That's one approach. Another is to be proactive. Create new traditions rather than trying to replicate old ones minus your ex-wife. Consider what might actually feel good to you now, not what you think you should be doing based on past holidays." Her advice resonated with the approach I'd been taking with other aspects of my new life. Don't just survive the change. Actively shape it into something meaningful. For Thanksgiving, I accepted an invitation from Mark and his wife to join their family gathering. It was a generous offer, and spending the day with colleagues turned friends felt less loaded than being with family, where Christina's absence would be more conspicuous. The day turned out to be unexpectedly pleasant. Mark's extended family welcomed me warmly, asking interested questions about my photography and work projects rather than prying into my personal life. His teenage children drew me into a spirited board game competition that kept me engaged and laughing. By the time I left late in the evening, I felt connected rather than isolated, a stark contrast to the lonely holiday I'd been anticipating. Christmas presented a different challenge. My parents had divorced colleagues who would be spending the holiday alone, and I sensed my mother's unspoken concern that I not become a cautionary tale of post-divorce isolation. "We could come to you this year," she suggested during one of our regular phone calls. "See your new place, explore the city." The idea held appeal. My apartment was finally fully furnished and decorated to my satisfaction. Having my parents visit would give the space a sense of continuity with my past. Acknowledgement that while much had changed, some relationships remained constant. "I'd like that," I told her, "but fair warning, it won't be like Christmases at the house with Christina. I'm doing things differently now." "Of course, honey. We're not expecting anything to be the same. We just want to be with you." My parents arrived 2 days before Christmas, settling into a hotel near my apartment. I'd offered my guest room, but they'd insisted on giving me and themselves some space. At our age, we need our own bathroom. My father had explained practically. Having them in the city was both comforting and occasionally awkward. They tried so hard to be supportive, to avoid mentioning Christina, that sometimes our conversations developed strange gaps where her name would naturally have appeared. But there were good moments too, showing them my favorite new coffee shop, taking them on a photography walk through neighborhoods they'd never explored during previous visits, introducing them to colleagues at a casual holiday happy hour. On Christmas Eve, I took them to a jazz club for dinner and live music, a departure from our traditional family dinner at home, but one that felt right for this transitional year. As we listened to a talented quartet play holiday classics with improvisational flair, I noticed my parents holding hands under the table, exchanging small smiles in response to private thoughts. 40 years married, and they still found joy in each other's company. Once I'd assumed Christina and I would have that too. Decades of accumulated memories, inside jokes, synchronized movements through the dance of a shared life. The loss of that imagined future still ached, but watching my parents, I felt something new. Not just grief for what I'd lost, but curiosity about what different forms of happiness might still be possible. Christmas Day itself was quiet. Brunch at my apartment, gift exchange kept deliberately simple, an afternoon walk through a park dusted with light snow, dinner at a restaurant I'd reserved weeks in advance. Different from any Christmas I'd experienced before, but not lesser for the difference. Just new, a beginning rather than an echo of endings. After my parents returned home, I faced the final holiday hurdle, New Year's Eve, with its weight of symbolism and social expectations. Eric invited me to a party at his place in Chicago. Nadia, with whom I'd developed a genuine friendship over the past months, invited me to join her and some friends for dinner and fireworks. Several colleagues were hosting gatherings of various sizes. In the end, I chose none of these options. Instead, I booked a small cabin in the mountains 2 hours from the city, an impulsive decision that felt right the moment I made it. I wanted to mark this transition from one year to the next in solitude, with space to reflect on everything that had happened and everything that might be possible going forward. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a wood stove for heat and large windows overlooking a pristine landscape of snow-covered pines. I arrived on the afternoon of December 31st with provisions for several days, my camera equipment, books I'd been meaning to read, and a journal I'd started keeping at Dr. Levine's suggestion. That evening, as others celebrated with crowds and countdown clocks, I built a fire, opened a bottle of good wine, and settled into a comfortable chair by the window. The solitude felt spacious rather than lonely, intentional rather than imposed. As midnight approached, I bundled up and stepped outside onto the small porch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliantly visible away from city lights. In the distance, I could hear faint echoes of celebration from other cabins scattered through the woods. Music, laughter, the occasional celebratory horn. At exactly midnight, I raised my glass to the star-filled sky. To endings and beginnings, I said aloud, my voice sounding strange in the silent night. To the year that broke me and the year that will rebuild me. It was a dramatic toast, perhaps even a bit self-indulgent. But standing alone under that vast expanse of stars, marking the division between what had been and what might be, I allowed myself the indulgence. Some moments deserve ceremonial acknowledgement. I stayed outside until the cold forced me back in, watching the stars and feeling, for the first time in many months, genuinely optimistic about the future. Not because I had any specific vision of what it would hold, but because I was beginning to trust my own capacity to meet whatever came with resilience and openness. The new year dawned clear and bright. I spent the first day of January hiking nearby trails, taking photographs of winter landscapes, and beginning the process of setting intentions rather than resolutions for the months ahead. By the time I drove back to the city on January 2nd, I felt refreshed and centered in a way I hadn't experienced since before Discovery Day. Winter gave way to spring, marking a full year since the discovery of Christina's affair and the subsequent unraveling of my marriage. The anniversary might have been difficult, but I was away at a photography workshop in Arizona during that week, a scheduling choice that was partly coincidental and partly intentional avoidance of potential emotional triggers. The workshop itself was transformative. For 7 days, I immersed myself in learning new techniques, exploring the stark beauty of desert landscapes, and connecting with fellow photographers whose primary interest in me had nothing to do with my divorce story. I was simply James, the corporate executive with a good eye for composition and a particular interest in architectural photography. One of the instructors, a renowned photographer named Elena, took a particular interest in my work. "You have a distinctive way of framing emptiness," she observed, reviewing my portfolio during an individual critique session. "There's a quality of attentive absence in your compositions. Space is defined as much by what's missing as by what's present." Her observation startled me. I hadn't been consciously exploring themes of absence or loss through my photography, but looking at my work through her eyes, I could see the patterns she'd identified. "Is that a problem?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "To you or too depressing?" Elena laughed. "Not at all. It's honest, and honesty is compelling. The trick is to evolve with your own changing perspective. If emptiness is what you see now, capture it truthfully. When you begin to see something else, fullness, connection, whatever comes next, your eye will naturally shift to frame that instead." Her words stayed with me long after the workshop ended, becoming a metaphor for my broader recovery process. I'd been truthfully documenting the emptiness left by betrayal and divorce. That honesty had value, but it didn't have to be a permanent aesthetic or emotional state. Returning to my daily life after the workshop, I found myself noticing signs of spring with particular attention. Not just the obvious markers like blooming flowers and warmer temperatures, but subtler transitions, the quality of light changing, birds returning to urban spaces, people emerging from winter isolation with renewed energy. My own emergence felt similarly gradual yet unmistakable. The raw wound of betrayal had scarred over. The scar itself would always be part of me, but it no longer dominated my emotional landscape. I could go days without thinking about Christina or the divorce. I could hear love songs on the radio without immediately changing the station. I could see happy couples without internal flinching. Work continued to provide structure and purpose. The innovative approaches I brought to the Anderson Project had caught the attention of upper management, leading to conversations about a potential director-level position opening later in the year. The professional momentum felt especially validating, given how close I'd come to complete derailment during those dark early months after Discovery Day. My friendship with Nadia deepened and evolved. We'd moved beyond our initial just friends. Clarification to a comfortable companionship that included regular dinner dates, occasional weekend activities, and increasingly honest conversations about our respective relationship histories. "I'm not ready to call this dating," I told her one evening in April as we walked along the riverfront after dinner. "But it's definitely something," she laughed. "Very articulate, Mr. Corporate Executive. Words fail me when it comes to personal terrain these days. I'm still figuring out the new vocabulary." Nadia nodded understanding. "No rush to label it. I'm enjoying whatever this is." I was too. There was an ease between us that felt refreshing after the tension and drama of my marriage's dissolution. Nadia was straightforward where Christina had become secretive, independent where Christina had been increasingly dependent, engaged with my photography interest where Christina had politely tolerated it. The contrasts weren't lost on me, though I tried not to build a relationship on comparative geography. Dr. Levine, with whom I now met bi-weekly rather than weekly, encouraged this cautious re-entry into romantic territory. "The key is mindfulness," she advised. "Being present with what's actually happening rather than projecting past wounds or future anxieties onto this new connection. Easier said than done, of course." There were moments when Nadia would be late responding to a text, and I'd feel a familiar spike of suspicious anxiety, echoes of the period when Christina's communication patterns had shifted during her affair. There were evenings when I'd pull back emotionally for no apparent reason, creating distance as a preemptive defense against potential hurt. But increasingly, I could recognize these reactions as artifacts of trauma rather than responses to present reality. I could name them, examine them, and often move through them without acting on their distorted guidance. Progress, though imperfect. In May, I received an unexpected email from Christina's mother, Barbara. We'd had no contact since the night at Le Jardin, though I'd heard through mutual connections that she and Christina's father had struggled with their daughter's choices and the end of our marriage. "Dear James," the email began, "I hope this finds you well. Robert and I have thought about you often over this past year. While Christina will always be our daughter, we want you to know that we recognize the pain her actions caused and the unfairness of how your marriage ended. We valued you as our son-in-law for nearly a decade, and that doesn't simply disappear with legal paperwork. If you're ever open to it, we would welcome the chance to see you again, perhaps for lunch or coffee. With continued affection, Barbara. The message caught me off guard. I'd assumed that family ties would be severed along with marital ones, that Christina's parents would stand with their daughter regardless of the circumstances. Their willingness to acknowledge what had happened and maintain some connection with me felt unexpectedly healing. After considering for several days, I replied, "Dear Barbara and Robert, thank you for your kind message. This past year has been one of profound change and eventually growth. I would be happy to meet for lunch when you're next in the city. While our connection has necessarily shifted, I too value the relationship we built over many years. Wishing you both well, James." We arranged to meet the following month when they would be in town for a concert. I wasn't sure what to expect from the encounter, whether it would be awkward or emotional or surprisingly normal. But I was curious to discover what form this post-divorce extended family relationship might take, if any. The lunch itself turned out to be both poignant and comforting. Barbara hugged me tightly when we met at the restaurant, tears in her eyes. Robert shook my hand firmly, his expression a complex mixture of affection and regret. "You look well, James," Barbara said as we settled at our table. "Really well. Thanks. I feel not the same, but better. Reconstructed, I guess you could say." Robert nodded. "That's a good way to put it. Life has a way of breaking us down and building us back differently." We talked about safe topics first. My work, their retirement activities, mutual acquaintances from the years when we'd been family. Gradually, the conversation shifted to more personal territory. "We want you to know," Barbara said carefully, "that while we love Christina and are supporting her through her own healing process, we never condoned what she did. It went against everything we thought we'd raised her to value. She made choices I couldn't understand." Robert added, his voice gruff with emotion, "Still can't, really. But she's getting help, trying to become someone who wouldn't make those same choices again." I appreciated their honesty, the refusal to either excuse Christina's behavior or completely reject her because of it. It reflected a mature understanding of how people can do terrible things without being terrible people, how love can coexist with disappointment, how family bonds can stretch without breaking even through the most challenging circumstances. "How is she?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. A year ago, I couldn't have asked it without that familiar surge of pain and anger. Now I felt genuine curiosity about Christina's post-divorce journey, separate from my own. Barbara smiled sadly. "She's finding her way. Therapy has helped. She moved to a new apartment recently, started a mindfulness practice. She's trying to understand why she made the choices she did, so she doesn't repeat those patterns. She asks about you sometimes." Robert added, "Not intrusively, just hoping you're okay." The information settled strangely in my chest. Not painful exactly, but weighted with the realization that Christina and I would always be connected through our shared history, even as we built entirely separate futures. "You can tell her I'm doing well," I said after a moment, "that I hope her journey brings her the insight she's looking for." As we said goodbye after lunch, Barbara held my hands in hers. "Family isn't just about legal ties, James. You'll always have a place in our hearts." The sentiment touched me deeply. In the scorched earth aftermath of Discovery Day, I'd assumed that every connection associated with my marriage would be severed. The possibility of maintaining meaningful relationships with Christina's parents, on new terms, with clear boundaries, felt like an unexpected gift amid all the losses. Summer arrived with a heat wave and news of the director-level promotion Mark had hinted about months earlier. The timing felt significant, professional advancement coinciding with my continued personal rebuilding. The new role would mean more responsibility, a substantial raise, and the chance to shape strategic direction rather than simply executing others' visions. "You've earned this," Mark said when he delivered the news officially. "Not just through your work performance, which has been exceptional, but through demonstrating remarkable resilience and professionalism during an extremely difficult personal time." I thanked him, genuinely moved by the recognition. The structure of work helped me through the worst of it, having somewhere to focus my energy when everything else felt chaotic. Well, now you get to channel that energy into building something new. The executive committee was particularly impressed with your proposal for restructuring the creative division. They want you to implement it as your first major initiative in the new role. The vote of confidence energized me. I'd spent months feeling like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Now I was being entrusted with creating change, with building something according to my own vision. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. As I reconstructed my personal life, I would simultaneously be reconstructing a key department within the company. I celebrated the promotion with a small dinner gathering. Eric in town for business. Nadia, two colleagues who'd become friends, and surprisingly, my former mother-in-law, Barbara, who happened to be visiting that weekend. The eclectic mix of people from different spheres of my life reflected how I was piecing together a new support system from both old and new relationships. Over dessert, Eric raised his glass in a toast. To James, who somehow managed to turn the worst year of his life into a launch pad for something better. I'm proud of you, man. Others added their own variations on the theme. Acknowledgments of how far I'd come since the dark days of early divorce. Expressions of admiration for my resilience. Excitement about what lay ahead. The warmth of their support wrapped around me like a physical presence. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was putting away the last of the dishes, I found myself standing in my kitchen, struck by a sudden awareness of contentment. Not happiness in the ecstatic sense, but a quiet satisfaction with the shape my life was taking. I had meaningful work, genuine connections with people who cared about me, creative outlets that brought fulfillment, and an increasing sense of being at home in my own skin. The journey from Discovery Day to this moment had been painful beyond description. I wouldn't have chosen it, wouldn't wish it on anyone. But standing in my kitchen reflecting on the evening celebrations, I had to acknowledge that the devastation had ultimately forced growth I might otherwise have avoided. The betrayal had broken open calcified patterns, demanded I examine assumptions about myself and relationships, pushed me toward authentic choices rather than comfortable defaults. The healing wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be entirely. But I was no longer defined primarily as a person recovering from betrayal. I was becoming someone new, someone who incorporated that experience without being limited by it. My phone pinged with a text from Nadia. Had a great time tonight. Your friends are lovely. Especially enjoyed meeting Barbara. Now I understand where you got your taste for dry humor. Talk tomorrow? X. I smiled at the message. Appreciation for her perceptiveness, mingling with amusement at her observation about Barbara. The easy affection in her words warmed me. We weren't using the word relationship, yet but whatever was developing between us felt honest and promising. Thanks for coming, I texted back. Yes to tomorrow. Sleep well. X. Setting my phone aside, I finished cleaning up, then moved to the living room windows that overlooked the city. The summer night was alive with lights and movement, people dining at sidewalk cafes, couples walking hand in hand, friends gathered on rooftop patios, all creating a tapestry of human connection that continued regardless of individual dramas. A year ago, such a scene would have heightened my sense of isolation, amplified the contrast between others' apparent happiness and my own devastation. Tonight, it simply looked like life unfolding in all its complexity, joys and sorrows, beginnings and endings, constants and changes interwoven in patterns too intricate to fully comprehend. I was part of that pattern again, no longer suspended in the frozen moment of betrayal's discovery, but moving forward with the current of time. The future stretched before me, not as a clearly charted course, but as a range of possibilities I was newly equipped to navigate. Whatever came next, career advancement, deepening relationship with Nadia, continued creative exploration through photography, eventual moving beyond the apartment that had served as transitional space, I would approach it with hard-won wisdom about resilience, about the difference between love and attachment, about the possibility of building meaning from the wreckage of broken expectations. Standing at my window, watching the city pulse with life beneath a summer sky, I felt a surge of something I finally recognized as hope, not the naive optimism of youth, but the tested, tempered hope that comes from surviving what once seemed unsurvivable. The kind of hope that knows darkness intimately and chooses to believe in light anyway. Thank you, I whispered to no one in particular, or perhaps to whatever force governs the mysterious alchemy that transforms suffering into growth, endings into beginnings, broken hearts into stronger ones. The past year had taken me through the territory of greatest fear, betrayal, humiliation, loss of future I'd planned, fundamental questioning of my judgment and worth. I'd survived it all. More than survived, I'd emerged with greater clarity about what mattered to me, what kind of life I wanted to create, what kind of person I aspired to be. Not in spite of the devastation, but because of it. Not bypassing the pain, but moving through it towards something authentic and earned. Not returning to who I'd been before, but becoming someone new, Someone with scars that had healed into wisdom, someone acquainted with depths that made heights more appreciable, someone who understood both the fragility and resilience of human connection. I turned away from the window and moved through my apartment, turning off lights as I prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new steps in this ongoing journey of reconstruction. I was ready for them. Not because I had all the answers or complete confidence, but because I now understood that healing wasn't a destination, but a practice. The daily choice to remain open to life despite its capacity to wound. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I thought briefly of Christina, wondering where she was in her own journey of understanding and rebuilding. I hoped she was finding her way toward insight and peace, not out of lingering attachment, but out of the simple recognition that all humans deserve the chance to learn from their mistakes, to become better versions of themselves. The thought came with no pain, no anger, no lingering desire for revenge or justice, just a quiet acknowledgement that our stories continued separately now, each of us responsible for writing the next chapters of our own lives with whatever wisdom we'd gained from our shared failure. As I drifted towards sleep, one final thought surfaced. Not a dramatic revelation, but a simple truth that felt like the appropriate conclusion to this year of destruction and rebirth. I was going to be okay. Different than I'd planned, marked by experiences I'd never wanted, but ultimately okay. More than okay. Alive in a deeper, more conscious way than before, present to both joy and sorrow. Grateful for second chances and unexpected resilience. Ready for whatever came next. It was enough. It was everything.